So a further point in reflecting on those last the previous two recordings, was to discuss more why it was I pointed out that the Genesis narrative mentions God in the singular and not the plural, and that intertwines with the hypotheses I put forth. Because on one level, you've got the single man with the attraction toward the common woman. On another level, telling it like that way to the masses had a number of effects. If your one source of everything is this single castle, then to question the source would almost seem so second nature. In fact, even the matters over which they seem to be making their most intelligent and pronouncing their most intelligent judgments would have been, and ultimately amounted to being, an incestuously charged family extinguishing facade. So saying that God in the singular, if amongst the commoners and the plebs was polytheism, the belief in more than one God, then all of them would go, well, which God? Instead of which of you in the castle was behind this, for instance. The involvement of the two men. See, for instance, here's another example. Ancient castles executing people by forced drowning, for instance. They may have written narrative of a worldwide flood because at the time it would have served as a warning to the rest of the plebs, like, we'll do this to you, sort of thing, if we have to. It's a utilitarian reason for why at the time these stories might have erupted. Dispatching guards and watchmen in pairs can account for why you get stories like animals pairing up together in two mating pairs to board the boat before the flood of the earth. So you'll hear religious people say, well, these stories you were saying that are myths appear in various regions of the world, and you go, yeah, were they or were they not regions that may or may not have been known to have at any point in historical time had kingdoms, perhaps? Ask them that question. So there is some it's assuming the most naivety on behalf of the intent of these writers and thinkers at the time, as you assess their stories and their writings, then even their own writings are proof that they would have deserved. Now, that's no proof of God's existence. A tree of knowledge of all good and evil. Yeah, well, if a man in a kingdom was a nobleman that could not have a sex act with a woman amongst the commoners, and he saw her giving a blowjob to a man that he wished was him, it would have been a betrayal of everything he was ever taught was right or wrong, and everything he ever knew. Where he couldn't turn back and tell the rest of the royal family that he got a blowjob from this woman and it was good, or that he got a blowjob from this woman and it was bad. He couldn't have let them know about it at all. No. So that would have been a a limitation on the conscience of the man in the kingdom. Um, so yeah, I mean, if once you understand that gods were used to describe process what we now describe as uh, non-sentient with with concepts that don't entail sentience as consciousness we describe as processes, and even consciousness gets described as processes. Were described as gods. Further back you go, then you would have a god for, you know, the I'm being called by the god of the plops. Something might have meant you needed to go and take a crap. Uh, Things like that. Words are phrased that way. So yeah, what I really don't agree with is the hypocrisy that religious people who want to say hypocrisy because they saw a photograph of Harry the hippo three days but earlier, that are Christians or religious believers, and go into healthcare and then go, oh, psychologists make such an amazing sense of the human mind. It's amazing. Like, you can just think of why do you think an archetype? So it has to be. Does it always have to reduce to or mean? Um, if you break it down to idealism, something that's instructive or has power over you. Uh, and if the insistence is that it would, then it would be too limiting a term. So what I'm trying to say, and it's only to complement what I've always said since I started sort of writing um, on life, thoughts on life, has been, yeah, if you. So it's what they do say about truth in terms of scientific terms is that falsifiability, the chances of falsifiability happening, like that, it's still a theory that the Earth rotates around the sun. It's just a theory for which the evidence has accumulated so much that other subsequent statements can be professed, that can be tested and experimented on, and that send back confirmative results. So the men like Ken Ham try and say there was historical science and um, there's observational science, and they're not the same. But if what's known about the most fundamental laws of nature are wrong, then all the other tests and experiments that have still been done are wrong. So he really cannot. If they're giving explanations for why we exist and evolution and how we came to exist, um, and he's say, well, you weren't there to watch the process, so you didn't observe it, so you didn't study it, so it's not scientific. Well, you know, if they're laws, they're not called laws in a prescriptive sense because a god said them. They're called laws because there's no experiment. Uh, and every experiment that's been done is almost acting in obedient, in a sense, to those laws.